Welcome to Evil Heart. Yeah.
Hello guys, so if you couldn't tell from the intro to this video is going to be about this guy. This is a 3-axis skull. This specific one is the Twisty Skull Kit 2.1. I don't believe this kit is available anymore, but there are others that are very similar or work basically the same. This is not going to be a 100% how to assemble this kit, but more as a general overview about how it works. Just to give you an idea, I thought it was pretty cool, so I figured I'd make this video. This specific kit, I was actually assembling it with 2 other friends. It was our first time for the 3 of us, so I figured why not show this and how it works. First we'll take a look at the brain. It's pretty gross, so if you're faint of heart you may want to look away. Just kidding. So obviously you cannot see what's under here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to disassemble this and then I'll come back and show you in pieces how it works. Okay, so this is as far as I'm going to disassemble this, but I will go over some of the parts. I'm going to call these the major components, but before I get started, I'll do a sort of a caveat that this is the first skull kit that I've ever assembled. So some of this may be generalizations, but I'm going to assume that other kits are very similar in design. Obviously you have the skull cap. I'm just going to put that aside. You have the main skull area. And I'll go into some details about these holes in a bit. You have the jaw. And I'll go into detail on this as well. This is the main mechanism that controls everything. It uses 4 servos. Basically, this is how you get the 3-axis terminology. This is actually a clear plastic. Very often you'll see these on the other videos that the cover here was removed. This one actually got stuck, so it would not come off, this little paper covering. But it's actually pretty good for filming because it shows you where the holes are. This is the front for this specific kit, and you can usually tell the difference based on the hole positioning. So you can see these 3 holes here are lined up this way. There's 3 like this, so that way you know that you're facing this plate up in the right way and that this is the front and it's facing in the right direction. This motor controls the rotation. So as you can see down here, it's actually connected to the servo through this little pillar, and this pillar is slightly flexible, as you can see. Then from here, this is where I actually have marked it wrong as a top, so just be cognizant of that. That's why I mentioned the positioning of the holes. That makes the difference. So this servo here, so let me actually, so this is the front. So I'm just going to rotate it this way. So now we know that this is the front here. Over here we have the servo that controls the jaw. So here you can see the positioning of the servo. And it's actually held down by little angle brackets and screws. These angle brackets that came with the kit actually are tapped, and you mount them with the screws that came in the kit. You have 2 additional. One is for the nod, one is for the tilt. As you can see, they're connected here by these arms. One thing that I did notice in this kit, these rods here are very long, and you're meant to cut these, but I still cut these a little bit, but I find that if I added some washers here just a bit, I actually pushed this down a little bit, so I really didn't have to cut them, and I got a bit of better movement out of it. These little angles here are meant to hold the assembly onto the skull, so that way as you're moving, the skull is not bouncing around. This threaded rod is meant to attach it to whatever you're going to attach this to. This one I had it attached to a base just because it's on the table and it's just really for assembly. This is probably going to go mounted on something, but I'm not sure what the ultimate place for this is going to be. So that's the gist of it. That's basically how it works. You have a servo that controls the rotation, two servos that controls the tilt and the nod, and a servo that controls the jaw. So I'm just giving you a little bit of a 360-degree angle view. So, and I'll focus it again from the top here so you can see. Now on these, you don't really need all 4 of the screws, and you're probably going to run out of screws if you use all 4. If you notice, all of these servos are really held on by 2. So you don't really need all the screws for this to work properly. So that's really it for the assembly of this. This kit actually, over here, it only comes with the 1 nut. I actually felt that if I locked it in with another nut, I got better movement because it kept this from becoming too tight. So you would get better rotation from here. So again, it's not what it says. The washers is not what it says, and the extra nut is not what it says. But I found those are pretty good improvements to keep this rotating very loosely without the nut becoming loose. And these washers here help push this down a little bit to give you more distance for these movements without having to cut these little rods too much. This one is very long. You will definitely have to cut this one. The way that I cut this, I used these type of pliers. And obviously these are for bigger screws, but I used the smallest one. I just put it in across and then I just shear it. I had to hold it pretty tight to get it to shear properly. But since this here is plastic, it's pretty easy to get it on there. So next I'm gonna go over to the skull. Okay, so as you can see, we have the main skull part here, the jaw and the skull cap. You don't really have to do anything to this, so I'm just going to put this off to the side. I'm just going to go to the jaw for a second. So the teeth don't come on, or really they don't come assembled. They tell you to glue them. And there's a little schematic that usually comes with these that it tells you which ones go where. Just as a note, what I did with these was I used hot glue rather than crazy glue to mount them, because I felt that it would give, and you can see the shininess there, once this gets painted to whatever it needs to be painted at, it gives you sort of a look of having gums rather than having open spaces in between the teeth where it's not fitting properly. So I felt that was a good way of filling it in by using, and I did it the same inside, you can see better there. It gives you more dexterity and it makes it look like it has gums. Now the most important part for this, the jaw, is this little guy here. This is what attaches it to the arm of the servo. This piece actually in this kit is metal, So I had to tap this. Well, first drill it and then tap it so this is screwed on properly. I drilled it all the way to the other side and tapped it all the way. You may not need to, but I figured this can always be filled in with something and just sand it a little bit. I just felt the tap came out better that way. The tap for this is going to be, I believe, is 2 30-seconds, but give me 1 second and I'll be right back with that. Okay, so the actual tap size is 256. I believe you should be able to read that right there. It's actually a pretty tiny tap. You can probably use a Dremel at low speed to tap this from this side. Just don't tap it too high up. You want a thick area because you don't want this to break. So before you actually cut the rod to the servo, you get this on, you get the rod onto the skull assembly, meaning get it on here, you pass it through your skull hole that you have to cut out, and I'll explain this in a second. You measure and then you cut your rod. Now you're better off cutting the rod a little longer and then have to adjust the threading and then cut it later if you need to. If you cut it too short, you're basically going to have to find a new rod. Obviously this is the tap holder, this is the tap. If you don't have these, I saw online somebody say that they do sell these that come across and have a nut, and then you could just drill the hole and just tie in the nut and then just put something over it. Since I happen to have the 256 bit and tap, I went that way. These here are little knobs that attach it to the skull, and they basically go in these holes here. It's pretty tight, so you sort of have to put it on this one side and then come around and just kind of pull it open and put it on the other. So as you can see, it's fairly loose, but when it first comes, it's actually fairly tight and you actually have to hold it to move it. It doesn't go down like that. So what I did was I sanded these just slightly a little bit, put it on, see the movement, sand it a little more, put it on, see the movement, just to make sure it had some nice movement. You really don't want it tight, so you get nice movement from your jaw. On the skull, again, I also did it with a hot glue gun to put on the teeth, so it looks like it has gums. So that's it for the jaw, so I'm just going to go over now to the skull. When you first get these skulls, at least this one, this hole is not this big, it's actually a hole about this big, which you're not going to get in much done through there. You actually have to cut this hole out big. This one actually needs to be cut a little more, as you can see from the marks here. I just haven't had a chance to do it. It has to be cut out pretty big. I used a Dremel, and the reason for this size is when you look at this assembly, you see these here, these will come out a little bit and you need room for them to move. So if you have a hole like this, it's just gonna get stuck and you're not gonna get movement. So that's why you want a nice big hole. So I actually use a Dremel to cut this slowly. This side here is pretty thick, so I need something a little stronger than that to cut it. Or use the Dremel and just do it slowly. But again, I just haven't had the opportunity to do that, so I'll be doing that in a bit. Now, this hole does not come here. You obviously have to cut this hole. It's hard to tell from the positioning where you sort of have to cut the hole. So that's why it's so big. If you know the exact spot, you could actually probably do it half the size of what it is. But it's not so big that it really shows a problem. And again, you could always put maybe like a piece of clear tape over it here and then just kind of paint it however you're going to paint this, and it probably won't be noticeable, because really you need the hole to be down here like this. That's what I found for this kit. It was what was really needed. So if you sort of look at the positioning here where you have to cut it, you see the end of this part right here. You measure about 1/2 inch this way. So this sort of becomes your center right here where this meets. Becomes your center. You measure across about 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch this way and 1/2 inch this way, and you sort of make like this oval cut hole. And that's sort of what you need for this. Again, you could start smaller, start in the center, put your rod, put the jaw, see how it moves, and just start widening it as you need to, as you find you may need to do it. Now, you will also need to drill these holes. You can see on the other side. And the reason that you see these black marks here is because basically I sort of had to shave this down to make it flat on all of them because of the way that these L brackets sort of protrude. You can see how they protrude from the plastic here. So you need some room for that. You can drill these holes a little bigger maybe to push it in. You just have to be careful because you have to understand this is sort of like a plexiglass plastic. So this can crack. And if this cracks, you got a problem. So I actually widened these holes a little bit to give more movement and to be able to push it in a little bit. But then I felt that it was best to grind these down. So this is going down the grind about 3/4 inch. The hole positioning, I would say this is about 1/2 inch to 9/16 down. So actually let me get a ruler and give you a better measurement on that. So we're gonna assume that you want this flush with the top of the skull. So the hole looks like about 1/2 inch, I would say. It could be 7/16. So really, you could do 1/2 inch to 7/16 down from the side here to the center of the hole. So you just do that around. The way that you would sort of mark it is, since this is the front of your skull and this is the front, you sort of place this on. Use the little marks like I did right here where they are at for all of them. So that tells you the positioning. Go about 1/2 inch down from the center and drill your hole. Then on the inside, you make these marks. This is obviously about 3/4 inch down that I cut it. You can see right there, about 3/4 inch. So then you sort of kind of cut this open a little bit with your Dremel or something to make it flat. I use a Dremel on a knife to sort of flatten it. If you have a little chisel, you can actually make that easier. Just cut down a little bit to make it flat. Try it out, make sure it goes in smoothly, you know, until you get it positioned properly. So the holes for the eyes are already there. At least these do not move, so you can use those holes. These eyes came with a kit. They're RGBs, so they sort of just, this is a piece of black tape to keep it from coming out, so I sort of put it backwards with the sticky side, so that we just slide it in and they sort of stay there. You may want to glue them from the inside, depending what you want to do. This was just more for testing of it. They're actually controlled by this little board. I don't know if they sell this board anymore. This is the RGB Servo cheapy creepy board for the RGBs. Basically, you could select which color you want blue, green, or red. These other two are for ground and voltage. And your RGBs go connected here, so you sort of splice them together and put them on the colors based on this board. So that's it for the skull itself, this main assembly and everything else. I'm gonna go over now to the controller board. Actually, before I go on to the electronics, I figure I showed you how to assemble this together. Before I show you that, there's one thing that I missed. If you notice here, this is slightly bent. These actually come straight, but I found on the one for the jaw, if I gave it a little bend, maybe this around 20 to 30 degree bend, it pushed this in and it lined up better with the hole. Otherwise, you get some rubbing here. So that's something you can do. I just grabbed it with a little plier like this, a nose plier, and just kind of bent it while I was holding it. Just be very careful when you're doing that so you don't snap it if you decide to do this. Otherwise, you have to buy a new one. So let me show you how to assemble this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the eyes. That's just for ease of running the wire. Now this is where you would hot glue them if you wanted them to stay in place. If you want to make this hole bigger so you could adjust the positioning, you can, and then hot glue them. They'll tend to keep coming out because I haven't glued them on. But again, this is just for demo. Okay, so I have my eyes in place. You can see right there it popped out. And that's fine for now. Next, I'm going to put on this. So just make sure this is facing the front. And this arm here, just make sure you line it up with the hole when you push it in so nothing breaks or it doesn't get stuck inside and you have to pull everything apart. So just, you grab your wires, kind of push them in. You run this through. Now make sure right there you have your arm for the jaw there. And as you put in this in, keep an eye on the wires to make sure none of them are pinched against the skull. Line up your brackets with your holes. And then it should go in if you did what I did with cutting little notches on it. So once you have that in pretty roughly, just line up one of your holes. And you can always leave this a little loose here on this side in order to help line it up. Put in one. Don't tighten it all the way because it'll make it easier to keep adjusting. So then I'll do the next one. Again, this is pretty tight because of the way that I did it. Just line up your hole. Get your next screw. There's a little piece of plastic in there, so let me just clear that out. You don't want it to get stuck in there. And then move to the next one. These holes for these screws, make them bigger than the screw, but not too big that the head goes through, so it makes it easier to line things up. So now I'm just going to tighten these all the way that I have all four on. And if you loosened any of these on the top, don't forget to tighten those again. I only did the one here. So I'm just going to tighten that up. This board does not really have to be flush since it is going to be moving around. Just, you don't want it hugely out. You can see right there it's slightly off by less than a 16th right here. So that's not really a big problem. You should have all your wires out. And you may want to reroute these around. Like let's say if I reroute this one through here to push it to the back. That way it's not getting pinched by anything. Next is gonna go the jaw. Now before I put in the jaw, you see right here on the arm, you should see that this plastic piece has a little hole in it. You can see right here. That's what's gonna go against this little bump here and lock it into place. You can see the eye popped out there because I didn't glue it on. So I'm gonna go put one side of the jaw in, pull, get the other side. You should hear a snap. Make sure that this is facing towards the bump. Bring it up and you can see snaps in. Now you have your jaw in place. Pretty much assembled. All we really need to do is put in the skull cap, which the skull cap has these little bumps or knobs or whatever you call them. Line them up and put it on. I don't know if you want to glue this at all or just hold it down with tape or something. I doubt this is going to be roughing around too much, so it should be fine. Then you just plug everything in as you need to plug it in to your boards. And that should be it once you have everything assembled. Now on to the electronic portion. Alright, so in this version, this is the board that we're using. This is the Frankenstein Skull Controller from Haunted Hackers. This is for 3-axis. I believe this kit is no longer available, but I could be wrong. But if you go to Haunted Hackers, I believe they have some other options for the controller boards. This kit actually came disassembled. You had to buy all the components, solder them on yourself. So before you buy any of these kits, find out if it comes assembled or you have to assemble it yourself, because if you don't have the skill set to assemble it, then you're basically going to be stuck with a kit you can use, or you're going to have the joy of learning how to solder. This is a pickaxe kit. This is the MP3 controller that goes over here. These pins here are where you connect your jaw and your servos and your LEDs. This works with an SD card that needs to be programmed in a specific sequence. Really means you need to copy the files onto this SD card because of the way this board works in a specific sequence for it to work properly. And you have your main power and your power for your servos, which are separate from each other. So that's it. This is all that was needed to get that initial video portion that you saw at the beginning of this video. I actually recorded myself saying evil hub ha 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 on Audacity and then saved the file, named it per the specifications that are required for this on the first folder, and it spoke what I said. The actual kit online comes with some speech that this has that you can use for demoing or trying it out, and there are instructions that come with the kit on how to program it. But again, this is this kit. Other kits obviously are going to be different and might actually be easier. I don't know, since this is the first kit that I've ever worked with. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like the video or the channel, don't forget to subscribe to eBall Hub on YouTube. Happy hunting. Just one more note, if you happen to get a hold of one of these or have one of these and you haven't assembled it yet, this has a marker here that says pin 1, and on the board here you will see a 1. I'm not sure if you can really see it there, but basically pin 1 and pin 1 needs to line up, and you basically just put this into position. Just be careful not to bend any of the pins, and your SD card goes in here, and that's all.
Welcome to Evil Hub. Yeah.